Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for the warm welcome, and it's really great to be here finally at the long table. I've not been here before. I just wanted to introduce myself briefly. I've put up here as the first description that I'm a public transport user, because I absolutely am a public transport user. I come from a long line of non-drivers. I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a city of about 100,000 that had really good public transport. Shout out to Cambridge, another Cambridge person back there. And I never needed to drive. My parents didn't drive, my brother didn't drive. I moved to this country, and then when I moved out to Dursley, at the age of 50, I realized rural transport is not actually a thing, and I had to learn to drive at the age of 50, which annoyed me greatly. I mean, I don't mind knowing how to drive, but I really hated having to have a car, and for a while we were a two-car family, and that really didn't sit well at all. So first and foremost, I am a public transport user. Second of all, I am the founder of the Commuters Transportation Group, which has a very, very grand and long name, but it's actually about 4 or 5 individuals who just really got annoyed a few years ago at stagecoach bus cuts in the area, and we formed together to try to push back on those. And we were successful in doing that, and we got some services that had been cut. We got them partially restored, which was really great. And then the last identifier up there is that I am a county councillor for the Dursley area, so that includes Nympsfield, and that includes Yulee, Coley, Foster, Leonard Stanley, and Alpen. So I'm just going to drop my hot water bottle now because I've warmed up a bit. Thank you. Right, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a bit about the vision. And when I was getting ready to do this presentation, I talked to Robin, and he said, "Go wild, Wendy, be big, be bold, think of all these crazy things. What do you think should happen?" And I thought, oh God, I'm really the kind of person who's quite pragmatic, and I like to think about, well, okay, what do we need to change, and how, who's going to have to change, what government systems will have to change, what infrastructure do we need? I always think of the practical steps to get to that wild vision, but I thought for tonight, no. This is about imagination, this is about what ifs, this is not about the solutions necessarily, but it's talking about, what would we like to see. So I came up with 3 points here, and this beautiful, lovely view of our gorgeous countryside. The first one is every village, every hour, which is kind of what it says on the tin. Every village, every hour. Now, you might be thinking, oh yeah, that is actually pretty wild, because boy, that would be something else if we had a bus that went to every village, every hour, 7 days a week, from early in the morning until late at night. Wow. That does sound crazy, but there are places in the world that have that actually have that in place for their residents, and there are places like the Zurich canton in Switzerland, there's Bern canton in Switzerland, there's I think it's North Hesse in Germany. These are all rural areas that have put in place the kind of public transport that we would love to see here, which is every village, every hour, 7 days a week, early morning until late at night. So it is possible for some, and I rather suspect that was close to what we had here many, many years ago, perhaps before the Bus Deregulation Act in 1984, before the real move to cars in the 60s and 70s. I strongly suspect we did have villages that had regular bus services, but we certainly don't now. As you all know, I'm sure if you've used any buses in the area. So that's my first vision, is what if it was every village, every hour? What would that be like? And what would we need to think about to get to that point? The next thing that I started thinking about is transport as a human right. And this is something that has been brewing in my mind for quite some time. And it started to formulate into words when I read a report that was done by the New York University School of Law team on human rights, who started doing a series of investigative reports into the effects of privatization around the globe. And 2 years ago, the first report that they did was on bus privatization in this very country. And they had a whole team of researchers who came and looked into what had happened to buses here, what they had been back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the effect of the deregulation in the mid-80s, and the type of services that we're left in now. It's a fascinating report. If you haven't read it, I've got links on my presentation, which I'm sure can be shared around later. It's really well worth having a look. And one of the things they talk about in this report is this idea of the right to public transport. And I absolutely think this is something we should be demanding. I don't think this is an outrageous ask. I think this actually is a right. If you look at the UN Declaration of Human Rights, they list all these different articles that are specific rights that humans should have living on this earth. And there are things in there like the right to access education, the right to access medical care, the right to access work if you want to work, if you are disabled, the right to be able to be treated fairly. And I thought, well, in our area, in rural areas around this country, there are so many communities that actually cannot access education and work and medical facilities, let alone leisure facilities, because they are absolutely cut off from any type of public transport. And if you have a car, you are so privileged as to be able to run a car, you have some way of existing in a society, but if you don't, either because you can't afford one or you're trying to do the right thing for the environment, you really can find yourself completely cut off. And I think that is a human rights issue. And I think that's how we need to be framing this conversation with our political representatives. I think we need to be talking about it as a human rights issue. There are some countries, in some areas of some countries, that have enshrined the right to public transport in their laws. It is on the books that wherever you live, you will have a minimum standard of public transport. We don't have that here, but I think that is something we need to start aspiring to. The third one I put up here is community transport, and I put the community bit in quotes because this is distinct in my mind from the really, really good community transport buses that go around towns and help people get to hospital appointments. They're fantastic, run by volunteers usually, very short, shoestring operations. They need to be continued and properly funded. But what I was thinking of here is something a bit more granular and a bit more detailed, which is local communities looking to see what they can do to help people get around. It's kind of like what we did during the pandemic, when all of a sudden the barriers came down and when people couldn't leave their houses and couldn't go to shops and couldn't go to pharmacies, groups sprung up, either from things like GL11 Community Hub in Dursley or from neighborhood groups, next door, Facebook groups, that kind of thing. People stepped up and they started offering to help others and said, do you need a prescription? You're isolating? I'll go get it for you. And I think we actually need to incorporate more of that in how we think about transport. Never to let the buses off the hook and never to lose the eyes on the prize of every village every hour, but to supplement that and to also bring a real sense of community. I think that's something we need to be looking at instilling and doing more of. And just a very simple example, last week I was away for the week, coming home on Saturday. I was coming into the Commuters train station in the middle of the day. There were no buses that would be meeting a train. It's 3 miles to my house. And my husband couldn't come pick me up because he was at an event. And I just put something out on a local WhatsApp group and said, is there anyone who can come pick me up? I'm coming into the station in a couple of hours. And sure enough, someone did. And I think we need to kind of be more accepting of offering those types of informal transport arrangements and of asking for them. I suspect we're all very shy and very English about asking for help like that, but people love to help and love to be useful. So that's another thing that I would like to see in my vision for bus transport. And then the last slide I've got here is just some links and some articles. The first one, that public transport private profit, is that report about that was done by the NYU Law School, and that is really worth a read. It's very accessible. It's all online. The second one, Every Village, Every Hour. Yes, I stole that title. That was not my thinking. It's a report from the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. Really interesting to look at because it has pages and pages and pages of examples in the world where they have delivered Every Village, Every Hour. And then it's got a really good section of what it would actually cost to implement something like that here. And it's not impossible. at all. It's definitely a doable thing. And then the last bit there, I've just got a few links to some organizations that you can have a look at if you don't already know about them, either campaigning organizations or some local car sharing organizations like what they do in Oxford, where they are actually running on a street-to-street level car share schemes for residents. And then We Own It, which is all about taking back things under public control. So hopefully we can make those slides available and you can have a look at those links and look at those reports. They're really readable and quite an eye-opener. And that's it. Thank you very much.